Jake Morrison stepped off the big ship onto the space station. His boots made soft sounds on the metal floor. The station was huge and busy. Many different kinds of aliens walked around, doing their work and talking to each other. But Jake could not take his eyes off the tall lizard people. They were everywhere. These aliens stood much taller than any human. They were at least 8 feet tall, maybe even 9 feet. Their skin was covered in scales that changed colors. Some had green scales, others had gold or bronze-colored ones. When they moved, the scales caught the light and sparkled. Jake had spent 6 months learning about these aliens during his trip to this place. The lizard people called themselves the Draknari. They were warriors who had ruled this part of space for 3,000 years. That was longer than humans had been building cities on Earth. The Draknari lived by strict rules. Everything was about being strong and showing honor. The most important thing in their culture was something they called throne rights. This meant that your place in their society depended on whether you could take a seat of power and keep it. Only the strongest and smartest could sit in the high places. Jake was here with other humans to watch a special ceremony. It happened only once every 50 years. The best Draknari warriors from all over their empire would come to fight for seats on the High Council. These seats were the most important positions in their whole civilization. No outsider had ever been allowed to watch this ceremony before. Humans were the first. Admiral Lisa Carter walked up to Jake. She was the leader of all the humans on this mission. Her face looked serious as she watched the big lizard aliens moving around the station. "Remember, Morrison," she said to Jake, "we are only here to watch. The Draknari are being very kind to let us see this. Do not do anything that might make them angry with humanity. This is too important." Jake nodded his head to show he understood. But something caught his attention near the center of the station. A group of young Draknari warriors were arguing loudly. Their scales were changing colors quickly, which Jake had learned meant they were upset or excited about something. One of the young warriors noticed Jake watching them. This one had special golden markings on his scales that showed he was from an important family. The alien walked toward Jake with smooth, dangerous movements, like a big cat hunting. "You are the humans, yes?" the lizard alien said. His English was good, but had a strange accent. "I am Scareth. I come from the Bloodscale clan. My family is very important." Scareth looked down at Jake. The alien was so much bigger that Jake had to look up to see his face. Scareth's yellow eyes studied Jake like he was looking at something strange and weak. "Your species is very interesting to us," Scareth continued. "You have soft skin with no scales. You have no claws to fight with. You have no natural weapons at all. How did such weak creatures ever learn to travel between the stars?" Jake could feel many other Draknari watching this conversation. Some had stopped their own talks to listen. Others were pointing at the humans and making sounds that might have been laughter. Jake knew that what he said right now was very important. It could change how all the Draknari thought about humans. "We use our minds," Jake said simply. "We build tools and work together. We may not have claws, but we have other strengths." Scareth made a sound that was definitely laughter. "Tools and teamwork? These are the ways of prey animals, not predators. The strong take what they want. The weak serve the strong. This is the natural way." More Draknari had gathered around now. Jake could see Admiral Carter watching from across the plaza. Her face showed worry. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, another human officer, had moved closer in case there was trouble. "Maybe," Jake said carefully. "But we humans have learned that sometimes a natural way is not the only way. Sometimes there are better ways to solve problems." This made Scareth's scales change to a brighter gold color. Jake was not sure if this was good or bad. The young warrior leaned down so his big head was closer. To Jake's face, Better ways? Scareth repeated. You think you know better ways than the Draknari? We have ruled this sector since before your species learned to make fire. We are the apex predators of 100 worlds. I do not question your strength, Jake replied. I can see that the Draknari are mighty warriors. I am just saying that strength can take many forms. Scareth stood up straight again. He looked at Jake for a long moment. Then he turned to the other Draknari warriors, who had gathered around them. This small human thinks he understands strength, Scareth announced in a loud voice. Perhaps during the Grand Conclave, he will learn what real strength looks like. Perhaps he will see why the Draknari are the masters of this region of space. The other warriors made sounds of agreement. Some of them looked at Jake with what might have been pity. Others just seemed amused by the whole situation. Jake felt the weight of all their attention. He knew that everything humans did here would be remembered. The Draknari would judge all of humanity based on how the human visitors behaved during this important ceremony. I look forward to learning about your culture, Jake said politely. Scareth nodded once, then turned and walked away with the other warriors. But Jake noticed that the young alien kept looking back at him as they left. Admiral Carter quickly came over to Jake. What was that about? She asked quietly. I think, Jake said slowly, that we are about to learn a lot more about Draknari culture than we expected. The Grand Conclave started when the station's lights came on to make an artificial morning. Jake and the other humans were taken to special watching areas high above the arena floor. From up there, they could see everything but could not interfere with what was happening. The ceremony was both beautiful and scary to watch. In the center of the arena, 12 fancy chairs were arranged in a perfect circle. These were the seats of honor. Whoever sat in these chairs would rule the Draknari High Council for the next 50 years. Hundreds of Draknari warriors had traveled from all over their empire to compete. They came from different worlds and different clans. Some had dark green scales, others had bright red or deep blue ones. All of them were huge and looked very dangerous. Jake watched as the competition began. The warriors had to pass 3 different tests. First was combat, where they fought each other with traditional weapons. Second was strategy, where they had to solve difficult military problems. The third test was kept secret. No one knew what it would be. The fighting was amazing to watch. These aliens could jump 30 feet straight up into the air. They moved so fast that Jake could barely follow their movements. Their strength was incredible. He saw one warrior throw a spear that stuck deep into a metal wall. The strategy part was just as impressive. The warriors had to plan attacks on enemy positions using models and maps. They had to figure out how to defeat larger armies with smaller forces. Even Admiral Carter, who is a very experienced military officer, was impressed by their tactical thinking. As the day went on, fewer and fewer warriors remained in the competition. The weak ones were eliminated early. Only the strongest, smartest, and most skilled were left. Scareth, the young warrior Jake had met the day before, was doing very well. He won every fight he entered. His strategy solutions were clever and effective. It was clear that he was one of the best warriors in the competition. Jake found himself watching Scareth more than the other competitors. There was something about the young Draknari that reminded him of human soldiers he had known. Scareth fought with honor. He helped opponents who were badly hurt. He showed respect for warriors who fought well, even when he defeated them. The sun was setting when something unexpected happened. And very old Draknari walked to the center of the arena. This was Vorthik the Eternal, the current leader of the High Council. His scales were so old they had turned almost white. Scars covered his body from countless battles. Vorthik raised his arms and spoke in the Draknari language. His voice was deep and powerful. It echoed through the entire arena. Jake listened to the translation through his earpiece. "Warriors of the Draknari," Vorthik announced. "Today you have shown great skill and honor. But before we continue, I wish to demonstrate something to our guests from Earth." Jake felt his stomach drop. This was not part of the planned ceremony. Admiral Carter looked pale. Something was wrong. "To show the superiority of Draknari culture," Vorthik continued, "I extend an invitation to our human visitors. If any human believes they are worthy, let them step forward. Let them try to claim one of these seats. Let them learn why the Draknari have ruled this sector for 3,000 years. The arena became completely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat. This was not an invitation. It was a trap. It was designed to make humans look weak and foolish in front of the entire Draknari elite. If the humans refused, they would be seen as cowards. The Draknari would never respect them. But if they accepted, they would be destroyed. No human could possibly compete with these alien warriors. Jake looked around at his fellow humans. Admiral Carter was staring at him with wide eyes. Lieutenant Rodriguez looked terrified. The other officers were all looking down at their hands, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. All the Draknari in the arena were looking up at the human viewing area. Thousands of yellow eyes were watching to see what the humans would do. The silence stretched on and on. Jake thought about his training. He thought about all the human soldiers who had died fighting for what they believed in. He thought about what would happen to humanity's reputation if they backed down now. Slowly, Jake stood up. "Morrison, no," Admiral Carter whispered urgently. "This is insane. You cannot fight them. They will kill you." Jake looked at his commanding officer. Her face was full of fear and concern. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "if we do nothing, humanity will be seen as weak forever. Someone has to try." "But you will die," Lieutenant Rodriguez said. "This is not a game. Draknari combat is deadly." Jake checked his sidearm and the few pieces of human equipment he was allowed to carry. "Maybe I will die," he said, "but at least I will die trying to show that humans are not cowards." He turned and walked toward the exit that led down to the arena floor. Behind him, he could hear Admiral Carter calling his name, but he did not stop. As Jake walked down the long ramp to the arena, he could hear the Draknari making sounds of disbelief and amusement. Many of them had never seen a human up close. Compared to their huge warriors, Jake looked tiny and weak. When he reached the arena floor, Vorthik approached him with obvious satisfaction on his face. The old Draknari leader was enjoying this moment. "So, little human," Vorthik said, "you accept our challenge? You understand that to claim a seat of honor, you must defeat all who stand against you? That to retreat is the ultimate dishonor?" Jake looked up at the ancient warrior. "I understand. And you understand that we fight with traditional weapons only? No plasma guns, no energy shields. Only what a warrior can carry and use with their own strength." Jake nodded. He had expected this. Draknari traditional weapons included swords. As long as he was tall, heavy nets that could trap multiple enemies, and spears that could punch through starship armor. "Then choose your weapon, human," Vorthik said with a cruel smile, "and prepare to learn why your species should stay in the outer rim where you belong." The weapon racks were brought to the center of the arena. Jake walked over to look at his choices. Everything was made for creatures much bigger and stronger than humans. The smallest sword was taller than he was, and probably weighed more than his entire combat pack. The nets were so heavy, he could barely lift one with both hands. The throwing spears were like telephone poles with sharp points. The battle axes looked like they were meant for chopping down trees, not fighting enemies. Even the daggers were as long as human swords. Jake walked slowly around the weapon display. The Draknari warriors were watching him and making sounds that were definitely laughter. They thought it was funny that he could not even lift their weapons properly. Scareth had been chosen as Jake's opponent. The young warrior was standing nearby, his golden scales gleaming under the arena lights. His own weapon was a curved sword that looked like it could cut a car in half. "Choose quickly, human," Scareth called out. "I do not have all day to wait for your death." But Jake was not looking at the traditional weapons anymore. He had walked past all of them to a simple equipment station at the edge of the arena. This was where the station workers kept their tools for maintaining the arena. Jake picked up a coil of climbing rope and a standard grappling hook. The rope was strong but light. The hook was designed to catch on metal surfaces and hold heavy weights. Arena fell silent again. Even Vorthik looked confused by Jake's choice. "This is your chosen weapon, human?" the old Draknari asked. "This is my chosen weapon," Jake confirmed. Scareth threw back his massive head and roared with laughter. The sound echoed through the arena. Like thunder. "A rope? You would face a Draknari warrior with a rope? At least your death will be quick." Other warriors joined in the laughter. The sound was deafening. Jake could see the human observers in the stands, looking horrified. Admiral Carter had her face in her hands, but Jake was not paying attention to the laughter. He was studying the arena. The ceiling was very high, at least 50 feet above the floor. Decorative pillars reached up to support the roof. There were platforms and ledges built into the walls for lighting and sound equipment. Jake had trained for zero gravity. Combat in space. He had learned to think in 3 dimensions, not just 2. Most fighters only thought about moving forward, backward, left, and right. But in space, you could also move up and down. You could use the environment as a weapon. The Draknari were ground fighters. They were used to battles on solid surfaces. Their weapons and tactics were designed for enemies who would stand and fight face to face. Vorthik raised his hand for silence. "Let the combat begin," he roared. Scareth moved with the speed of a striking snake. His sword cut through the air, where Jake's head had been just a moment before. But Jake was no longer there. The grappling hook flew through the air and caught on one of the decorative pillars. Jake swung up and away from Scareth's attack. The young Draknari's claws raked through empty air. The crowd gasped in surprise. They had expected the human to die in the first few seconds. Instead, he was swinging through the air like some kind of strange monkey. Scareth snarled and leaped upward, trying to catch Jake as he swung past. But Jake was already releasing his rope and throwing the hook to a different pillar. He swung in a wide arc, staying just out of reach of the angry warrior. "Coward!" Scareth shouted. "Come down and fight like a warrior." Jake did not answer with words. Instead, he swung low and kicked Scareth in the back as he passed. It was not a hard kick, but it was unexpected. The young Draknari stumbled forward and nearly fell. The crowd was no longer laughing. They were watching in fascination as Jake used his rope to move through the air in ways they had never seen before. He never stayed in one place long enough for Scareth to attack him properly. Jake began to target specific spots on Scareth's body. As he swung past, he would strike at the warrior's knees, or tangle his weapon arm with the rope, or hit pressure points that would make Scareth lose his balance. None of these attacks were meant to seriously hurt the Draknari. Jake knew he was not strong enough to cause real damage to such a powerful opponent, but he could frustrate him. He could make him angry and careless. Scareth's scales were changing color rapidly. They went from gold to red to orange as his anger grew. He was swinging his sword wildly, trying to hit Jake as he flew through the air. But every attack missed. The crowd was getting quieter. They were beginning to realize that this was not going the way they had expected. The small human was not just avoiding defeat. He was actually controlling the fight. But Jake knew he could not keep this up forever. His human muscles were getting tired. His grip on the rope was starting to slip. Scareth was strong and had much more endurance than any human. Eventually, Jake would make a mistake, and then it would be over. He needed to end this fight now, and he needed to do it in a way that would earn respect, not just survival. Jake looked around the arena one more time. The 12 seats of honor were arranged in their circle in the center. One of them was directly below where he was swinging Dot as Scareth charged toward him again. Sword raised high, Jake made his final move. Instead of swinging away from the attack, he swung directly toward the angry warrior Dot at the last second. Jake released his rope and tackled Scareth around the waist. The young Draknari's own momentum carried them both forward. They crashed into one of the ornate seats of honor in a tangle of arms and legs. The heavy chair tipped over. Both fighters hit the ground hard. For a moment, neither of them moved. The arena was completely silent. Then Jake rolled away and slowly got to his feet. Scareth was still on the ground. His sword arm was trapped under the weight of the fallen chair. He could have freed himself, but it would take time. Jake could have pressed his advantage. He could have claimed victory while Scareth was helpless. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone in the arena. He extended his hand to help Scareth get up. Scareth stared at Jake's outstretched hand. His yellow eyes were wide with surprise and confusion. In Draknari culture, helping a defeated enemy could mean two very different things. It could be the highest honor one warrior could show another, or it could be the worst insult, suggesting that the defeated warrior was too weak to deserve a proper victory. The arena was so quiet that Jake could hear his own breathing. Thousands of Draknari were watching to see what would happen next. This moment would be remembered and talked about for generations. Scareth's scales had changed to a deep blue color. Jake had learned that this meant a Draknari was thinking very hard about something important. The young warrior was trying to understand why a human would offer help instead of claiming victory. Slowly, carefully, Scareth reached up and grasped Jake's hand. Jake pulled him to his feet. The Draknari warrior was much heavier than any human, but Jake managed to help him stand. "You fight like no warrior I have ever faced," Scareth said quietly. His voice was different now. The anger was gone. Instead, there was something that sounded like respect. "You use the world around you as a weapon. You turn strength against itself, and you show honor to those who would not have shown you the same." Jake nodded. "Where I come from, we have a saying. The strongest person is not always the one who wins. Sometimes the strongest person is the one who knows when not to fight." Scareth tilted his massive head, trying to understand this concept. But if you do not fight to win, why fight at all? "Sometimes," Jake said, "you fight to prove a point. Sometimes you fight to earn respect. And sometimes you fight to show that there are different ways to be strong." Before Scareth could respond, heavy footsteps echoed across the arena floor. Vorthik the Eternal was walking toward them, his ancient face showing an expression that was impossible to read. The other members of the High Council followed behind him, their massive forms creating a circle around Jake and Scareth. "Human Jake." Morrison, Vorthik spoke in a formal voice that carried to every corner of the arena. "You have defeated Scareth of the Bloodscale clan in honorable combat. By the ancient laws of our people, you have earned the right to claim a seat of honor on our High Council." A wave of shocked whispers swept through the crowd. No outsider had ever been offered such a position. It was the highest honor the Draknari civilization could give to anyone. Jake looked up at the viewing area where Admiral Carter and the other humans were watching. Their faces showed pride, amazement, and worry about what this might mean for human-Draknari relations. Taking his time, Jake walked over to the fallen seat of honor and carefully lifted it back to its proper position. The chair was heavy, but he managed to set it upright. Then he turned to face Vorthik and the assembled crowd. "I am deeply honored by this offer," Jake said clearly, "but I must respectfully decline." The whispers became a roar of confusion and disbelief. Vorthik's eyes narrowed dangerously. His scales darkened to an angry red color. "You refuse the highest honor our civilization can bestow?" Vorthik demanded. "You consider our council beneath you? Do you think humans are superior to Draknari?" "Not at all," Jake said quickly. "I decline because I am not Draknari. This seat belongs to one of your people. It should be earned through your traditions and held according to your values. For me to accept would be to take something that is not mine to claim." Jake turned to face Scarith, who was still standing nearby with a confused expression on his scaled face. "However," Jake continued, "I would like to nominate Scarith of the Bloodscale clan for this position. He fought with honor and courage. He adapted to unexpected tactics. He showed wisdom in defeat and grace in victory. These are the qualities you seek in your leaders." Now it was Scarith's turn to look shocked. His scales went through several color changes as he tried to process what Jake had just said. "You would give your earned seat to the warrior you defeated?" Scarith asked in amazement. "I would give this seat to the warrior who deserves it most," Jake replied. "That warrior is you." Vorthik stared at Jake for a long moment. The old Draknari's expression went through many changes. Anger, confusion, suspicion, and finally something that might have been understanding. Then, to everyone's surprise, Vorthik began to laugh. It started as a low rumble in his chest and built into a sound like distant thunder. Soon the laughter was echoing through the entire arena, shaking the walls and making the floor vibrate. "Extraordinary," Vorthik declared when his laughter finally stopped. "Absolutely extraordinary. The human wins a seat he cannot claim, then gives it to the warrior he defeated. This is either the greatest wisdom or the greatest foolishness I have witnessed in 5 centuries of life." He turned to address the full assembly of warriors and spectators. "Let it be recorded that on this day, a human named Jake Morrison brought shame to our proud traditions." Jake felt his heart sink. Had he made a terrible mistake? But Vorthik was not finished speaking. "He brought shame to our traditions not through victory or defeat, but by showing us something we had forgotten. He showed us that honor is not determined by the strength of one's claws or the sharpness of one's blade. Honor comes from wisdom. It comes from knowing when to fight, when to show mercy, and when to step aside for the greater good." The old Draknari walked over to Jake and placed one massive clawed hand on his shoulder. "You have taught us that strength takes many forms. Physical power is only one kind of strength. The strength to do what is right, even when it costs you personally, is perhaps the greatest strength of all." Vorthik turned back to the crowd. "I declare that from this day forward, humans will be welcome in Draknari space as equals and allies. Any who harm them harm us. Any who honor them honor us." The arena erupted in cheers and roars of approval. Warriors who had been laughing at Jake an hour ago were now looking at him with respect and admiration. As the formal ceremony continued, and Scarith was officially inducted into the High Council, Admiral Carter made her way down to the arena floor. Her face showed a mixture of pride, relief, and amazement. "Morrison," she said when she reached him, "do you have any idea what you have just accomplished?" Jake looked around the arena. Draknari warriors were now approaching human delegation. Members with genuine curiosity instead of contempt. Conversations were starting. Friendships were being formed. For the first time since humanity had entered this region of space, they were being treated as equals rather than inferior beings. "I think," Jake said with a small smile, "we just made some very important new friends." 3 months had passed since the Grand Conclave. Jake stood in the observation deck of the human diplomatic station, watching ships come and go in the busy space lanes. But now, many of those ships were Draknari vessels coming to trade with humans or just to visit and learn about human culture. The changes had been amazing. What started as a simple diplomatic mission had turned into the beginning of a strong alliance between two very different species. Trade agreements had been signed. Cultural exchange programs were starting. Draknari and human scientists were working together on new technologies. Ambassador Lisa Carter, who had been promoted after the success of the mission, joined Jake at the observation window. She was holding a data pad with the latest reports from Earth. "The President wants to give you a medal," she said with a smile. "The Congressional Medal of Honor. They are calling you a hero who changed the course of human history." Jake shook his head. "I was just doing my job. Any of our people would have done the same thing." "I do not think so," Lisa replied. "What you did required a special kind of courage. Not the courage to fight, but the courage to think differently. The courage to see beyond the obvious solution." Through the window, they could see a familiar figure approaching in a small Draknari shuttle. It was Scareth, now Counselor Scareth, coming for his weekly visit to the human station. In the months since the Grand Conclave, Scareth had become one of humanity's strongest supporters in the Draknari government. He had helped negotiate the trade deals and had convinced other Draknari leaders that humans were worth treating as equals. "He has been asking about you again," Lisa said. "He wants to know if you will accept his offer to visit the Draknari home world. He says there are people there who want to meet the human who taught them about honor." Jake had been thinking about this invitation for weeks. The Draknari home world was beautiful, according to the reports. It was a place where ancient traditions mixed with advanced technology. But more importantly, it would be a chance to learn more about these allies that humanity had gained. "Maybe it is time," Jake said finally. A few hours later, Jake was sitting in the station's main conference room with Scareth and several other Draknari officials. The young counselor's scales had grown brighter and more colorful since gaining his position. Success and respect had made him even more impressive than before. "My friend," Scareth said in his improved English, "I have news that will interest you. The High Council has made a decision about the empty seat." Jake looked confused. "Empty seat?" "The seat you won but did not claim," Scareth explained. "We have decided to leave it empty. There is now a plaque on it that reads, 'Reserved for Jake Morrison, who taught us that true strength lies not in taking what you can claim, but in knowing what you should claim.'" Jake felt embarrassed by this honor. "That is too much. I do not deserve such recognition." "You do not understand," another Draknari counselor said. This was Threxia, an older female with deep purple scales. "That empty seat has become a symbol. Young Draknari warriors now compete not just to claim seats, but to be worthy of them." They asked themselves, what would the human do? Would he think? This was right, Scareth nodded enthusiastically. It has changed our entire culture. Warriors now help their defeated opponents instead of humiliating them. Leaders ask what is best for everyone, not just what gives them more power. We call it the Morrison Principle. Jake was amazed. He had just been trying to do the right thing in a difficult situation. He never imagined it would have such a big impact on an entire civilization. "There is more," Threxia continued. "Other species have heard the story. The Centauri Alliance wants to meet with humans. The Crystal Builders have sent ambassadors. Everyone wants to know more about the species that taught the mighty Draknari about honor." Over the following weeks, Jake traveled to several Draknari worlds. Everywhere he went, he was treated with respect and curiosity. Young Draknari would ask him to tell the story of the Grand Conclave. Older ones would want to discuss philosophy and different ideas about strength and leadership. But the most meaningful moment came when he visited a Draknari Military Academy. The instructors there had changed their entire training program based on what had happened at the Grand Conclave. "We used to teach only physical combat," the Academy commander explained. "Now we teach students to think creatively. We show them that the environment can be a weapon. We teach them that sometimes the best victory is the one you do not claim." Jake watched young Draknari cadets practicing with ropes and grappling hooks, learning to swing through obstacles instead of just smashing through them. It was strange to see his desperate improvisation turned into a formal fighting technique. But more importantly, he saw them helping each other train. Instead of only competing, they were also cooperating. They were learning that being strong did not mean you had to make others weak. On his last day visiting the academy, Jake was asked to speak to the graduating class. These young Draknari would soon become officers in their military. What he said to them might influence how they treated other species for decades to come. "When I fought Scarith," Jake told them, "I was not trying to prove that humans are better than Draknari. I was trying to prove that we deserve respect. I learned that day that respect cannot be taken by force. It can only be earned through your actions." One young cadet raised her hand. "But how do you earn respect from someone who is stronger than you?" Jake thought about this question. You show them something they have not seen before. You make them think in a new way. You prove that strength comes in many different forms. Another cadet asked, "What if you lose? What if your new way does not work?" "Then at least you tried," Jake replied. "At least you showed that you are not afraid to be different. Sometimes that is enough to change minds, even in defeat." When Jake finally returned to the human station, he found Admiral Carter waiting with more news from Earth. "The United Nations wants to make you the first human ambassador to the Draknari Empire," she announced. "They want you to help build the relationship between our species." Jake looked out at the busy space lanes again. Human and Draknari ships were flying together now, their crews learning from each other. Children on both worlds were growing up, knowing that the universe was full of friends, not just enemies. "I accept," he said simply. Years later, historians would write about the moment when humanity gained its first major alien ally. They would analyze the political and economic impacts of the human-Draknari alliance. They would study how it changed the balance of power in the galaxy. But Jake always remembered it more simply. It was the day he learned that sometimes the smallest action in the right place can move the largest obstacle. It was the day he discovered that true strength is not about what you can take, but about what you choose to give. And in the High Council chambers of the Draknari Empire, there still sits an empty chair with a small plaque. It reminds everyone who sees it that the greatest victories are sometimes the ones you do not claim for yourself.